everybody. Good evening. We are in another episode of In the First.
Wave to the
And
camera. Say hi. Yep.
we have State Senator Eric Buckson with us. So thanks.
Yeah.
You're spending the time up in Newcastle County today, and you said you're okay, right?
Doing just fine.
Yeah.
No worries.
It's a little tough when you get above the canal, and because when you leave God's country down there, and
Yeah, but there's great pockets up here, and you're evidence of one of them.
oh well, thank you. That's very nice of you. Very
No
nice.
question.
So before we get into our discussion with Eric tonight, and we got there's a lot to talk about, and we don't know how much we're going to get, but you never know where it goes.
Well, first
So-
thing is Jim's driving tonight.
Yeah, I am driving. Everybody kind of knows my capability with technology is I hire smart people or I hang around smart people. But I am driving tonight to try to figure this one out. Rob was on away last week in work, and we did a couple episodes, and now we got to get him here to get them out. But on current events, so we are shooting this on Monday. It's March the 10th, and it's been interesting because of Doge continuing to take a look at the issues with the federal government and the financing of the federal government, and we're still suffering the aftermath. And we discussed this last week on the Democrats' pitiful performance in response to President Trump's amazing speech. So in a national setting, that's going on there. It looks like they're going to be gathering in Saudi Arabia, which I've been in Saudi Arabia and been there a couple of times there. They're going to try to do some peace talks in there. It looks like Ukraine may participate, but certainly the United States and Russia will. So hopefully we can get that war stopped. Locally, there's a lot going on locally, and we're going to get into that. Obviously, the impact of the utility bills have been a huge issue. There's been a lot of discussion, both if you go to Facebook and next door, people complaining about their high utility bills. I have some ideas about why that's true. We'll find out what you feel about that.
Sure.
We still are having a lot of issues with education, another hot issue, and the other issue, which is more so up in Newcastle County, is the reassessment, because the valuations are very high, and I think come July, when those tax bills come out, people are going to be really hammered. Take that on top of the high energy costs, and there's a lot of problems. Walmart is another one of the another one of the companies that is considering fleeing the state because what used to be our corporate tax. The Delaware was the corporate capital of the world. We're losing that, I would contend, because of some activist judges and some overly oppressive policies that the Democrats have brought in to make this one of the most regulated states in the union. So those are a couple of hot issues. So, but yeah, here we are. I'm Jim Weldon, Rob Close, Eric Buckson. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, just a real quick background. First off, I knew your dad, and the very famous Dave Buckson. He was Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and actually served a short term as governor, I think.
19 days.
19 days, yeah.
Sure.
So what was fascinating is I was at the Republican convention in Rehoboth Beach when he was running against Peterson.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I was very young then,
You
obviously.
aged well, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Be
you very
around
much.
there then.
Yeah, I've
Good
been
enough.
around. It was really, really interesting. But so very, very fascinating. And your father is an amazing legacy. And I'm sure he's looking down on you and being very proud of what you've been able to accomplish. So
Yeah, absolutely. He was
Yep.
a tremendous influence on my life, and one of the reasons I'm here today. In
yeah,
fact,
yeah,
there
no
was a
doubt. So
Meeting today where we were discussing, how you got here as a legislator, and I said, I learned a lot from my father about the 1-2s, but I also learned that timing matters and that family matters, and so trust God's plan, and when it's the right time, make it happen.
there you are.
That's how
There you
come
are.
I'm here.
So Caesar Rodney High School, University of Delaware. You were a gym teacher,
Mhm.
right? And you coached wrestling,
Coached a bunch of sports. Wrestling was probably the primary one.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Bunch of
So you're married, beautiful wife, and you have 4 children.
4 children. You're doing good.
Thank
Doing
you.
great.
Thank you.
I don't
Yeah.
always remember that. So, yeah, you're doing fantastic.
So, I mean, real quickly, Other than the fact that your dad would be an amazing influence,
Yes.
how did you end up getting into politics?
I mean, it was in the blood. I always wanted to serve. I admired the way my father could connect and help folks. The best learning curve I had was that I could walk with him into a room of very influential individuals, turn around, leave there, and then go over to a racetrack and walk through the stalls with folks that have, all kinds of life lessons, life experiences that were way different than the room I just left. And he cared about each person he was talking to. And
Yeah.
I think that bodes well for folks that want to be good elected officials and not politicians. But yeah, so, one of the things I didn't like about it, though, was he was gone a lot. So I knew I wanted to stick around home, raise a family. I did. 4 children, as you said. Best decision I made was working 2-3 jobs every year so that my wife could stay home with my kids. I said that today in a meeting where I told a bunch of folks that were kind of saying that we shouldn't live in a country where, you have to work 2 and 3 jobs. And I said, disagree. I think you get what you earn. And I said, the value that you get from that are different levels. My kids never got to drive around a brand new car. They didn't get to go as a team to Disney World, but they were never poor.
Yeah.
And the experiences that we had were tremendous ones because of that. So, just blessed to be here, blessed to be an elected official as a county commissioner for 16 years before I decided to run for the Senate, because that was a once-a-week meeting, local. I could scratch the itch of wanting to help folks gain that experience, but didn't necessarily have to take the leap of faith to being a senator, which I'm very glad and blessed that I didn't, because the difference between the two are just leaps and bounds apart. There's no comparison. The things that I deal with at the legislative level, Senate level, comparative to the county level.
Yeah.
Not in value, but just in the diversity of aspects. You're getting ready to ask me questions as if I'm an expertise maybe on the Chancery Court, and we drift over into education, and we fly back into the budget. Whereas the county, I was the land use chair,
Right.
talking about zoning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I worked when I retired from the Newark Police Department. I went to work for Tom Gordon, and it was a fascinating experience. And I was part of his appointed political staff, and obviously worked very closely with the county council. Stephanie Hansen was the president of the county council, and had a pretty good relationship with her. So even though she's a Democrat,
Democrat.
She's been here. She sat in that chair.
She did.
Good
Yeah.
for her.
Yeah, we
Episode
did.
4? I think it was 3 or 4.
It was episode number 4. Yeah. So
Bring her back now that this electricity thing's going.
I know.
We
So,
had her right as we were detecting, all the trouble starting, and then what was it? A month later, those bills came out.
Yeah,
January
yeah.
hit. I think
Very sharp lady, very sharp as
Oh,
you
yeah.
She is.
very passionate in their lanes. It's unique. It's interesting. I was with Mansavinos today, Senator, and Senator Pinckney. What they've done over there on the Democrat side, and the supermajority they enjoy at the Senate side, is they kind of lane up in a sign, and they acknowledge that, right? So Hansen, of course, is the energy kind of lane, and believe it or not, Pinckney was assigned to more of the prison system, corrections type of lane. Mansavinos got hooked up with the veteran side of things. So they're all, not just veterans, but he's actually the senior side of things. So it's interesting that they lane up in these spaces and become like the expert of the Senate for that particular space, which is why I say it'd be interesting to bring her back and have her kind of explain her thoughts. Mine and yours probably are a little different than her thoughts.
It was pretty interesting because we did. I mean, obviously her forte was energy, and that was the focus. I let her explain some of how she got involved, which basically was a problem in her neighborhood, right? And that's how she got involved and running for council president, and the response that the lack of response that she got from the county council made her say, I'm going to run. And then when the opportunity came, she ran for state senate. But energy was her big issue. Obviously, she's very much in favor of the green energy. But I would say she got hit by some comments, but I would say she is an individual that while she is passionate about that and she has a desire, she is a person who will listen and is understanding the need to find some type of common ground.
I think she gets it. I know she knows there's in fact, I'm sponsoring co-priming with her a couple of bills that are seeking to. None of this is going to cure things, but seeking to lessen the impact.
Right.
Is what we're trying to do, and that's what I told her when I passed around a piece of legislation that will be coming out public here soon, and of course it goes out to the legislature first for signatures, and She hit me with an email saying, hey, would you mind if I co-prime? I said, certainly. But I said, how about if I co-prime these two? Because we can disagree about how we got here, but we have to agree on what we're going to do now we're here.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Can you talk about some of that a little bit? Like what are your ideas to
on how we got here or what we're going to do about it now?
maybe describe like where here is,
Yeah.
and then
where
then
is
where
here?
we're going to go forward. Yeah.
Yeah, so here is a very scarcity market of energy providers or options in the region. That's where we are right now. That's what's led to this, exaggerated cost. I use the example of eggs because it kind of aligns the same way. We have a situation going on with egg prices, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that equate to electricity? Well, picture the same thing. When you kill off the flocks, who are the egg providers, you create scarcity. When you create scarcity and everybody's trying to buy the eggs, drives up the cost.
And so why is energy scarce in Delaware? I'm just asking,
And that's a great call because we are not Delaware, we're region. So we're Delaware, we can provide our own. In fact, the Indian River plant was an example. But we also have to buy in a region. Well, we're surrounded by states that have similar initiatives. They are driving policy that forces coal and natural gas to either not expand or to go offline because of their hopes that we're going to raise up solar panels, wind farms, and other sources of energy. The problem is the policies were very successful at driving coal-fired plants and others offline. It was not as successful as matching it with the necessity to bring solar panels, wind production, everything else online. Why? Because coal and gas is an instantaneous 100% return on investment. The challenge with solar and wind is not only is it regulatory in nature, not only is a challenge to get it approved or to put it out on the ocean or to put it onto farm fields. But the return on investment isn't there because it's not always producing the energy you need.
Correct.
So you're always going to have the gaps. And so all those things combined lead to scarcity, which forces us, the region, PJM, to go out and buy it. And you're driving up the cost to do that. You're driving the cost because you're getting it further away, bringing it in. There's a lot going on, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard it described that way. That there were two primary initiatives. One, reduce the dependency on coal
100%.
and natural gas, but at the same time, the idea that wind and solar and renewables
100%.
were going to take over. And one of them went marching ahead forward, and the other did not. And there was no adjustment along the way, or
And there was no acknowledgement that you can't be this successful in running the coal and gas offline at the rate you're going. And PJM, to their credit, were screaming this. They were saying this is not going to work. These things are not going to line up. In fact, I was on the side of the road. I got a call from Senator Hansen. I was actually a county commissioner in land use charge. I told you that.
Mm-hmm.
And we were battling these mandates that were coming by legislation in 2021 that basically forced energy providers in the state to have a portfolio of about 40% green energy, right?
Yep.
So up until that point, there was no mandate. You did if you wanted to. They said you're going to have 40% green energy by like 235 or whatever it is. And so these energy providers said, well, we got to do something. Well, I'll tell you what they did. They attracted a lot of investors I started getting phone calls from people, groups from Massachusetts and Minnesota and New Jersey. And they're calling me saying, we need to sit with you and talk to you about your decision to start to implement some ordinances to manage this influx of solar. Up until 2021, the summer of, we hadn't had a large-scale utility solar request, land use application, or even a community size, which is 50 acres. Up until 2021, we hadn't had any, right? After 2021, we had 12 in the queue in a month.
Yeah.
We had farmers calling me going, this is crazy, because farmers lease land. A lot of what they do is lease,
Sure.
right? Now, the free market, I get it. And so what you're saying is that you own land, you're leasing it to Farmer A, and Farmer A is paying, we'll just use the number $1,000, right? $1,000 an acre to till it. We'll use that. And then the solar comes in and says, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll give you $3,000 an acre, and you'll keep the rights to it. So 25 years from now, when we walk away, we'll take all the solar out and give you the land back. Now, that might make sense, right? If it was a free market, you'd have to say stay out of it. It's not a free market.
That's
it's a
the
free
problem.
market created by government action. That's the problem.
That's exactly what the problem is.
Yeah.
And so what they've done is that they established a goal that simply cannot be met.
Yeah.
You can't, not even talking about price itself, you cannot meet the demand of energy needs in the state
Yeah.
with just solar and wind. It's not feasible at all.
Just look at Germany.
You look at Germany as a prime example, because people may not realize this, but wind turbines, they only really work when it's windy,
What?
and they don't work when it's too windy. So, and when is it the least windy? It's in the summertime. And when is your highest demand for energy? It's in the summertime. So they're trying to, and by the way, now if you want to talk about cost, it is clearly the absolute most expensive. We had Dave Stevenson on here, actually right after we had Stephanie on. And
Senator Hansen.
Senator Hansen, yeah, sorry. Yeah. And
He scolded me.
yeah. So
Way back.
but he said, look, one turbine can provide enough energy for one household for a year. That's a lot of turbines, right? And the problem is it's not really providing the energy because you can't store it, because it only will work for certain periods of time. Solar, everyone says solar is wonderful, and I think solar is fantastic. But again, there is limited time when solar will actually work. In the wintertime, you only have about 4 hours out of the day that where you can actually use solar, and there doesn't have the capacity to store it. So they're not very efficient, not very effective, and they're far more expensive. But what they've done is
6 hours, right? Storage 2 to 6 hours.
2 to 6 hours.
So it's not
That's
even
about
like
it.
days. It's
No,
2
no,
to 6 hours
no.
is just for peak.
Correct.
And it's really more of a capacitor. The battery technology, I think the cost of storing it is so much higher that
So
it's worth it.
So Reggie,
Yeah.
right, the regional aspect of it, I think what Reggie has done, personal opinion, is that they are artificially driving the cost up of gas and coal, which is one of the reasons why it became, I think, inefficient for Indian River to stay operational, because it was just too darn expensive. And they're artificially increasing the price so that it's not as far away from wind and solar. So I think that's an artificial component. The government has gotten involved, and then the government has kind of messed it up because it is not free market.
Now, it is not, and you nailed it, but in my short tenure and then my longer tenure as a county councilman, I repeatedly said to folks that if you want to confuse the argument by saying that we don't believe that there's climate change, there's been climate change for the existence of the earth.
That's correct.
So let's stop with this, misdirection. And you can have green energy. You just got to recognize that you're going to have to accept the cost, because they will come with a cost, especially if you want to drive solar and wind to the front. My argument is the cost will be so exaggerated it won't work. But if your argument is we can do this by growing these massive batteries and whatever else, and windmills to the far as you can see, I guess you could eventually get that leap of faith to make it happen. But it'll come at a cost so exaggerated that it will fall apart. Is what I was consistently saying. In fact, a month before this whole energy thing came out, the bill, I didn't know it. I was asked a question in a panel discussion with leadership. So they had the House leader, minority and majority, and then they had the Senate Sokola, and then I was filling in for Pettyjohn and Hocker. And I was asked the question, would you like to, as a government, inject into pricing for energy as a government? And I answered the question by saying no, and then I listened to a few more discussion. I said, well, hold on, let me come back. You're asking the question because of green energy, and that's what I said to the group. The problem with the bills that we passed in the last couple of years is they look past the warning signs. They look past what we have been told is going to happen because we're looking past it for hope. We're looking past it for this green utopia, which is my argument with very smart people like Hansen. You're looking past things that we know are going to occur when PJM says this,
Right.
hoping that it doesn't occur because we're going to sprout solar farms. You just don't know it yet.
I mentioned that to her, and I can't think of another technology that the government has said, we need this to be better than what actually exists, so go innovate.
Yeah.
Because that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to mandate through law innovation into the energy sector. That has never, ever happened in the past. You can't tell scientists, go invent this thing that we need.
Yeah.
Go invent this renewable energy that's actually economically feasible. so that humanity can avoid this, climate change that we can't control anyways.
That's exactly right.
I think people a lot of times also confuse climate change with pollution.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
coal technology and
100%.
natural gas,
100%.
and so there's a lot of spillover of emotion from the pollution side of things into climate change. And okay, well, greenhouse gases.
Mhm.
There's so much controversy around that we have not been taking accurate measurements long enough to really understand, the warming effect that greenhouse gases actually have on the planet. And I mean, we don't have to get into that, but it is very controversial, and the jury is still out on whether or not CO2 emissions have a meaningful impact on the overall global temperature.
Right.
What it does do is make the planet greener. We can prove that, which consumes more CO2. So
PGM showed a chart that basically showed initiatives that started, I don't know, years ago, 20 years ago, where we really got into the business of pollution, right, and started driving down our carbon footprint to where we are today. And it is a monumental drop in impact. And it leads you to the question, which becomes, okay, at what point is good enough? Because that's where we kind of are right now. You're heading into an area, if the majority party continues with the mindset where you start to desire to push it so far down that you actually don't see the harm you're causing, because it's illogical to think that even the United States of America could go to a zero-sum game in the world that we're living in today. So there's a lack of necessity to go zero-sum, and it's illogical to think we can, because if you could even come close to getting that, you are ignoring the competitors out there in the global scale that have a real role to play that are just walking right past you on this.
Yeah, they are.
China's building how many?
China, India,
plants?
all of them.
We're putting out a fraction of what they are.
It's just illogical.
It's
not
illogical.
necessary.
Well, it's illogical because China is considered an emerging country.
Yeah.
We actually pay them,
It's amazing.
and they're exempt from the Paris climate change.
And they're going to eat our lunch when it comes to manufacturing because it's so much cheaper.
So I'm holding up my phone. Delaware's climate action plan. This is just, what we're experiencing
See the
now
link below
is just the scratching of the surface. Because if you start to take a look at the requirements, things that have to be achieved this year in 2025 and in future, this is scary. These are unreachable goals that are coming at tremendous cost.
That's what people need to hear. And because separate the emotion, forget about the fact that you're far right, far left, or wherever you are, and just look at what we're saying. What we're saying is that we agree that we want Delaware to be a healthy state when it comes to air quality, water, and others. We want our country and we want our globe to be. But you have to recognize that the initiatives being pressed run right past a logical move to that and over to a utopia that has unintended consequences. Right? That's the problem. You're rushing in all these actions which feel good to you on paper. You're ignoring the unintended consequences that are coming. The high energy bills are just one example of what's coming.
Right.
We haven't even touched on some of these other initiatives, mandates for cars and stuff.
Yeah.
You can't keep up with this.
Yeah. Well, home heating, right? If you're they're forcing people to go to electric. Which is not very efficient and very, very expensive. So we said last week, please just look it up. Delaware's Climate Action Plan. Rob will have a link when we push this out. Go look at it. Find out all the go to Chapter 3 or Section 3. That's where you'll see all of these future mandates that are coming. You'll see a lot of things that are due in 2025. Somebody needs to sit down there and take a lot. I'm sure DENREC's doing this, but somebody needs to take a look and realize what's coming, and it's not good at all. And the impact is more than just the fact that it's going to be very expensive for you to pay your utility bill. The impact is that companies that want to come to Delaware look at a number of factors. And one of the factors that they will probably look at, especially if you're looking at more of the high-tech data centers, they want cheap energy. They cannot get cheap. First off, they can't get enough energy. And number two, they can't get cheap energy.
It's not even that they just want cheap energy. They need
it in order to function.
To be competitive in the market. Otherwise, it's just a waste of money. So there's no choice.
So you're denying your children a future because there's not look, we already have that now. There's very little opportunity for anybody young. Most people are when they graduate from high school or college, they go somewhere else because the opportunity just isn't here. A number of issues. But anyway, that's the climate. So that's where we're at. Now, you talked about where we're going to go.
So what the folks that are interested in how we got here might be the same folks, might be a little different than the folks that are just simply tuning in and saying, I don't need to know all that. I need you to know that my bill is at a point where I can't afford it.
Correct.
What can we do about it? And so that's really what our focus needs to be. We need to understand how we got here so we don't repeat mistakes and look at things in out years that maybe we can correct. But what do we do about it right now? I mean, we look at challenging the rate. So that's one of the things I have as a piece of legislation, directing the Delmarva Power to come back in front of the commission, the Public Service Commission, and reconsider the rate and reconsider a change, a lowering in aspects. Right now, they get a profit rate around 10%. That's probably 4 or 5% higher than other local energy providers. And
so that's their margin.
Yeah, about 10%.
On the cost that they pay for the electricity delivered to you.
That's
So
the profit margin they get to deliver to their investments or investors, and it's kind of a secured number there. And so that's the real challenge you have with some of these utilities. It'd be one thing if there was risk in the game of a fluctuating investment and those kinds of things. That's free market. But when you're a singular monopoly, which is what they are, and you're in front of a commission and they're justifying a rate increase that maximizes or guarantees your profitability, I don't want to demonize profit, but we're in a special situation right now where there needs to be a recognition that it can't be unreasonable. So that's just one. That doesn't cure everything.
Right.
I always tell folks that's like, what does that matter to me? Well, that's like going to a gas station. You look up on the sign, it's $3, and if we can get it to $2.50, because inside that $3 is all kinds of add-on fees.
Right.
Right, and so we need to do one thing. We need to justify what's in the rate, and then see if we can manage the rate and lower that, right? And that's specifically maybe to Delmarva Power.
Yeah, and so I actually have my bill I'm looking at here. I've got a house that I don't occupy. The second floor is 3 bedrooms and with an electric heat that I've had the thermostat set at 50 degrees since I bought it. Electric bill was $200. So looking at the overall... So the electric cost...
It's not even in there yet.
It's not even in there. Yep, $200. $124.99 for supply and $74.94 for delivery. So the supply is the rate of the electric, used by the house, actually.
Right.
There might be something wrong with that furnace upstairs, too. But at least that's what I'm, at this point, thinking. But the delivery charge as well. Yeah. So in that delivery charge is the cost to maintain the lines, the line workers, the poll workers and stuff out there. What else is going into that? Are there issues right now with them not having enough of the renewable energy, so they're being fined? I heard. It was
just it looks to me like it was just a business decision. It was cheaper to accept the fine than to try and meet the demand.
Yes.
Okay, so there is some cost there. They're being
about $26 million
over
over 2 years.
Yeah, Delmarva is because they can't meet it. It's impossible to meet that.
So they're passing that back along to the consumer.
And that's the irony of it. So they get to whether it's transmission lines. So when they put in investment yes, that answers your question. When they put in investment towards out years and bringing in new lines and whatever, they also pass that on. Everything's secured in a rate, right, that does not impact what you might think would be, I don't know, we've got to have this massive infrastructure improvement over the next 2 years, so our return on investment is going to be down. They don't do that. We manipulate the rate a little bit and pass it on to the customer.
Right. I
tried it because PGM plays a role too in the supply. So you got the user rate, the supplier delivery rate. I always tell folks, I'm trying to explain it to them, that if you go to a gas station, just picture your car as your house, right? You go to the gas station, picture the gas station as Delmarva Power, right? And then picture the fuel tanker that shows up to fill the tanks as PGM. And that's how it works. That's how your electricity works.
Right.
PGM is getting the electricity and kind of moving it and buying it, purchasing online to get it to Delmarva Power, and then Delmarva Power is delivering it to your house. And inside of that are all these various fees, which you don't really care about. You just know how much does it cost to fill up my car.
Right.
And when it's a lot, there's something wrong. And when it isn't, now here's the answer. They say, well, you're driving a lot or something. Well, that might make sense, but why is the rate going up?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in this regional conglomeration, this RGGI, where
Mm-hmm.
16 states where they're going out and figuring out where they can buy energy from. They have this mandate of so much has to be green. I think one of our largest purchasers, or our largest supplier of our energy, is Pennsylvania, which is not a member of RGGI.
Mm-hmm.
If they're compelled to go into that, that's going to have another impact on
Sure.
the cost.
Yeah, we buy Pennsylvania isn't, Ohio isn't.
Right.
There's various states there, so that's why we're buying it from. It's
Yeah.
a little cheaper to get it.
Yeah.
So there's no question. There's direct impact. RGGI's one of the reasons why, Indian River plant went offline.
Correct.
Indian River plant went offline, not because they couldn't be profitable,
Correct.
because they couldn't invest in the technology to make themselves meet the emission standards because of the uncertainty of the future.
Mm-hmm.
This corporation isn't going to invest the millions and millions of dollars to bring that plant up to new technology, which would be basically what you call clean coal,
Mm-hmm.
to meet the emission standards.
Which is pollution.
Which is whatever.
Sure.
But the issue is, if they're afraid that doesn't matter because within 7 or 8 years, there is no future for you because the goal is to get you out of business.
100%.
So they make a business decision to go offline. But the beauty is, in your bill was a fee that kept them alive, basically kept the ability to turn the light on if we ever needed you.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent millions on that.
We did. Yeah.
It's just an amazing. Why do we need them still online? And then you ask some of the major players in the state, and they go, well, because we don't think this is going to work.
So we'll move on to a couple other issues, but
sure.
the key point about what you're looking at legislatively is relief, but it's not solving the problem.
So there's that one, and then there's this thing called prudence of request. There's language in how you request an increase. Right now, in the current way they do it, they include also bonuses and major. That was an exam. That was like a glamorous one to say, well, inside their request can be bonuses for leaders and all that kind of stuff within a corporation, infrastructure costs and whatever. So they're trying to streamline the way a request for an increase is presented to the commission. They're narrowing down the scope. And then by default, that means that maybe their ask can't be as high.
Right.
Those are two things they examine. We got one that gets rid of RGGI altogether.
Yeah.
Right. It's a little
Good luck.
too late
Good luck
for
with
us.
that one.
Yeah. There's one that says we can use RGGI funds that are already collected to offer them up as sort of rebates for folks. The problem with that one that I have is that we consistently are looking past Delawareans that aren't technically low income, but are 100% stuck in that middle getting pinched.
Sure. Yeah.
Delawareans, just the general middle class folks who are being looked past and are being hurt by this exact rate pay that we need to look at. We need to find ways to help them, which is really what I'm trying to do with the modification of the rent, giving back some of the not rent, but the rate, giving back some of the RGGI, and then just not making these decisions anymore. That's probably the last one is let's be more aware of what the hell we're doing. Last one I'll say is this, and that is I am exploring looking at bringing the Indian River plant back because during the hearing, the second one, the expert invited by Senator Hansen sat there and spoke first, and I heard her say we need more power plants. And I asked her to repeat and define what she said, and she 100% said we must have all aspects of what it means to provide energy, including the Indian River plant. That was her words.
Back, that would be a tremendous asset.
That was her words.
Right. But the bottom line is that the Delaware Climate Action Plan, that plan, unaltered, is going to continue to create these restrictions and continue to drive up the cost of our energy.
Because of a supermajority.
Yeah.
There was nobody that can push back when you have that.
So
Damn the torpedoes. They're pushing ahead.
So let's, can we talk about that for a little bit? It's been interesting. I've been making this argument that our government is not very transparent because it is a one-party rule.
Yeah.
And Representative Brian Shoup has put some comments out about that, which I actually went on his Facebook and supported what he said. Can we talk about this issue about the supermajority and how much there is an opportunity for an opposing point of view that's actually considered?
So on the floor, where you would expect to have a debate, there is no debate. The decision's already made. They meet in caucus usually the night before,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they discuss all bills that are going to be presented that day and get a consensus of, where the group is, and then allow folks that might be concerned to voice their concerns, and then they get them in line.
Mm-hmm.
It is a rarity, and I mean a rarity in the 2 years that I've been there,
Right.
where there has been anything of a floor debate. Maybe I could count less than 5. So most of them are just a straight down the line vote. We, of course, as the Republican side, get up and voice our opposition. We're going to do so tomorrow, I'm sure, when Senate Bill 5 is discussed and voted on, which is basically a constitutional amendment making abortion a right
Right.
in our Delaware Constitution. So that's on the floor. But if you go off the floor, before you get there, there's called committee hearings. Well, the committee hearings are just backwards. If you've never been in a real committee hearing at a county level, maybe a municipality level, where there's actual discussion before it's even considered to be moved out, that is not the case. Committee hearings at Legislative Hall, there's usually 7 of us, 2 the majority, or 2 the minority, 5 of the majority. 9 times out of 10, they're putting it there for the symbolic nature of it. They'll allow the public to speak, but the public speaks after discussion between us is done, which I think is backwards, because you're relying on the 7 senators to be an expert matter on the bill,
Right.
when in fact the folks who are the experts are outside and you don't hear them in the discussion.
It's not very representative of
It's
the
not.
Yeah, I was going to say,
constituents
how is the public served by this?
at all.
It's in their minds very well. In fact, you'll hear them, and I say them.
The
Listen,
Democrats.
been very transparent,
Right.
because they had a rules package the very first day, and I offered up 6 amendments. My colleagues and I, my senators and I, we all introduced a couple of and talked about, and they all spoke to that.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll tell you the quite opposite, that no, committee hearings are vital to bringing the public in. And I don't know how that's true if you can walk a bill past committee right onto the floor, or you can have a bill in committee and then put it on the agenda the next day. I don't know how that's true when you can have a bill impacting Delawareans that you introduce over the weekend in committee and put it on a health committee at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. I don't know where that makes sense to anybody, but it does in Lake Hall. Now, their argument's going to be, well, we talk to our constituents. Well, these are Delaware bills. These are Delaware bills. I didn't know you were talking to your constituents. You never invited me.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't come down. Not always, but a lot of
Right.
times they don't come down. So anyway, it's argument that I've made consistently. They heard it. They joke with me all the time. But Senator Buckson's always saying words matter and process matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say that.
Yeah.
I always say that words matter. There are times when I have voted against a resolution. Resolutions are supposed to be, let's make today National Ice Cream Day.
Right.
Resolutions are never intended to be ultra controversial.
Mm-hmm.
But in my short time, that's what's happened. They have made resolutions a lightning rod. And so I pick words that matter and say that there's no way I can support this based on these words. And it matters. Or process. I won't even entertain a discussion on this bill. This bill never saw the light of day in committee. Or this bill was argued against in committee but never then returned to committee to be vetted. It's on a floor. There's no process there, so I'm out.
So you don't have to say this.
Mhm.
I'm going to say it, and if you
Yeah,
want
right.
to agree, that's fine. This is a dictatorship by the majority because they're elected.
Yeah.
Okay, and they are in charge.
Yep.
Supermajority in the Senate.
Mm.
They can do whatever they want to do,
Sure.
which they are. It's just pure power.
Sure.
But it isn't fair for the people of the state because you're not providing the people of the state a true opportunity to have input into what's going on. The assumption is that only Democrats have the best ideas,
Sure.
and Republicans do not. And while I'm the vice chair of the Delaware Republican Party, and I think Republicans have a lot of great ideas, I know that what should happen is there should be a give and take between both parties to come to a mutual agreement.
Sure.
And that is not a dictatorship by democracy. That is a representative government, which is actually what we have.
There's no question about it. And you look at it, people, listen, I always recognize the fact that elections are free and fair, and the Democrats are kicking our tail, especially
they
up
are.
north.
Correct.
You don't have to like it. It's a reality. And so because by default, they are in a supermajority in the Senate and they're one away in the House. It is what it is. We got to do a better job of presenting our opposition, presenting things that make sense, and then joining forces when it makes sense. And we've got to continue to do that. I've tried to do it myself. Tomorrow's a bright example of what we're doing here. So tomorrow there's that said Senate Bill 5. There is no reason why we need Senate Bill 5 on the floor for a constitutional amendment. The only reason it's there is to create division in the House so they can take out one more member, because abortion, right or wrong, is kind of a neutral argument for many Delawareans. In a moderate district, right or wrong, if they can put legislators on record, the House side, especially two in a moderate type of district, and get them on record as being against women's health care or reproductive freedoms, which we know that's not what that bill is.
It is not.
But they can run on it. The idea is to pluck one of them off, pick one of them off. Now you got a supermajority in the entire state. Now you're talking about just running things over.
Yeah, so what does that mean, a supermajority in the entire state, for people who don't know?
It just means they don't need a single Republican vote.
They can
to
do whatever
pass
they
legislation.
want, and they can change the Constitution.
They can change constitutions. They can go to, free mail-out ballots that have no, validation. All those things that you would be concerned with.
No ID for voting.
And all that.
Yep.
All that.
They can do anything.
And everything. Yep.
And they will, because one of the things I get back to again, it's interesting to have conversations with people that in general are nice people. Senator Hand's a nice person. But there's something that changes when you get inside that, the halls of legislative hall.
Right.
It just gets unusual. It really, really does. But you go to a supermajority, there should be very, very great concern.
There should be.
About what that means to a state and what that means to representation. When it comes to all Delawareans, we're going to lose that.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, it's a problem.
So can I just, while we're on that topic, why then do the people of Delaware keep voting for this? Because that's what it's coming down to. These representatives, this isn't new. This didn't just happen since the last election. This has been a slow burn, constant shift more and more and more left, and these policies have been being pushed through. So this isn't hidden. Why do you think Republicans aren't winning elections? Let's put it that way. Why do you think that Delaware has been able to degrade education, economy, energy, everything the way it has? Do you have any insight into that, just from running your own campaigns and kind of getting feel from what's going on at the state level?
It's population. I don't have an expert answer, but I'll give you my thoughts.
Sure.
Delaware.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, Delaware represents, in many ways, what the country looks like, right? So across the country, you have these centralized pockets of mass population that are very liberal, progressive, very Democrat strongholds, and they drive sections of the country. They drive states, right? Delaware's got the same thing. It's 1 million people. Half of them live above the canal, basically, and they're centralized in that city-type environment, no different than a Philadelphia or San Francisco, just not at the same scale. And that mentality, for whatever reason, is there. That mentality.
We're not a democracy. The state is broken apart into representative districts, and so we do get, I think, the population density corrected throughout the state. But you've seen a lot of the lower. So up there, we're getting a lot of Democrat votes, and the governor, they can drive, and there's a lot. But as far as representatives go, is it just we're not getting the message out? Is that people aren't really aware of what's going on, so they're just showing up at the ballot box and voting blue like they always do, thinking, trusting people?
So it's a fair point, but if you look at it, if you drop down below the canal, especially just below Smyrna, it's a sea of red. It's a sea of red, right? I mean, senators are all Republicans except for one, and that one senator is in a very unique spot, right? The Lewis Rehoboth area, more high-density population, transit, folks moving into the area. After that, it's all Republican. Same with the House side. You have a pocket, but other than that, it's mostly Republicans.
Yeah.
There's just no population there.
Right.
And there's a population. It's just it doesn't match the density that you have up north, which is where we are now, and for whatever reason, the mindset. that you have in those spaces. And I do think that there is an element of hopelessness, right? You're always hearing that. You guys hear it more than anything. We're blue state, we're blue state, we're blue state. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, I get it. We always want to remind ourselves that it wasn't my father, right? I was reading an article about him. Celia Cohen was a kind of a heavy duty.
She was with the News Journal.
Political pundit of sorts.
Yeah, she was good.
She wrote an article, and the article basically described the General Assembly at that time, and this was in the 60s. And in the 60s, it was worse then than it is now.
Right.
You had a more supermajority Democrats that controlled both the House and Senate, as well as the state elected offices at that time. I can imagine at that time it looked hopeless, although I will admit that a lot of Democrats then were probably Republicans now.
They were, yeah.
But still.
20 years ago. Wow.
Yeah,
But
right.
still.
Yep.
And then what happened? What happened was the state went on a run of Republican representation. In fact, the House was run by Republicans, majority Republicans, for years, right?
It was, yep.
So you always got to remind yourself that, it's always darkest before dawn.
That's right.
And if you don't ever quit, you're never out of the fight.
Nope.
And so tell your friends up here to stay in the fight, keep grinding. What we got to learn to do, and I used to tell my wrestlers, man, if you can score, you can win.
That's it.
So your first thing you got to do is make them bleed.
Well,
Touch one of them, score a win, get a win in one group, and maybe.
so I'm actually positive because there are a number of issues that are really completely owned by the Democrats that are causing a lot of pain for Delawareans. We have to help connect that the dots and let them see that. Speaking of one of the pains that Delawareans are suffering, which is an issue near and dear to you, is the education system.
Yeah.
So we have said this, but we'll say it again. Delaware ranks in the top 5, I believe, in per capita spending.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see varying numbers, but it's somewhere around 20,000 per student. And Delaware ranks in the bottom 5 in test results for both English language arts and in math. And then we have 17 single-digit schools, 15 of them in Newcastle County, where less than 10% of the student body can either read or write at their appropriate grade level. This is atrocious. Yeah. And the answer from the Democrats is we need to spend more money, and the governor just proposed spending a lot more money on education. But I don't think we're finding that the money, since we are spending so much on per capita, is really working. So you were a teacher. Mm-hmm. You just opted an opinion about the education system. I think it was right before the election. Mm-hmm. So what's your view on what's going on with the education system?
Yeah, we're overcooking the hell out of it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. Yeah, we are moving in with best practices to replace best practices that didn't work. Mm-hmm. That replaced best practices that didn't work. When we forget that in the simplistic nature of anything you do, it starts with the basics, being good at the basics, keep them simple, and then move forward. You got to have accountability and structure in the classroom, and you got to provide teachers with the ability to do that. And that's important. Right now we have clouded the classroom with all these others. Educators that are hired to teach 3rd grade, 4th grade math, is what you're saying, reading, are also charged with being the truancy officer, also charged with being the healthcare provider, the disciplinarian. They're supposed to be managing all of the IEPs and 504s, and make sure you're teaching.
All right.
And so we've lost our path there. And the reality is the children that are in front of them, the difference between children that are 7, 8 years old today's world and 7, 8-year-old, heck, when I was going to school, not a lot of difference there, but the difference between the 17-year-olds is wildly different.
Oh, yeah.
Wildly different. The way we're allowing these kids to progress and pass and move forward without a structure and accountability, without raising and keeping the expectations where they are. It's just we have lost our way. We have overcooked it. And you said to me, you wrote down an opinion. It was very simple. It was just 10 things that I would do as I was king for a day, and they were not rocket science.
They were not.
They were not hard.
Common sense.
They didn't cost money, and if you implemented them, they would instantaneously, within a year's time, start to have benefit, and within a couple years' time, you would see improvement. Not even a couple years' time. Within that year, you would.
All right.
So that's a big ask. Money will not cure this. Money
Right.
will not cure this, but they're going to run at it. I was on the phone when you meeted me today.
Mm-hmm.
It was because I was jumping off of a Zoom, 2-hour Zoom. I'm assigned to this committee that's basically looking at public education funding. And the number is really staggering. $500 million to $1 billion more dollars, and they're trying to justify that being implemented, put in to help with education. And money's not going to cure this.
Yeah, what do they think the money's going to do? Like, what are some things that they want to fund?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on with that. Obviously, specialty staff is one.
Okay.
So we're addressing right now funding educators properly. There's this belief that we need to compete with Maryland and Pennsylvania. Maybe we do. Maybe so we're raising the bar on their salaries. But secondary to that is this mindset now that we need all these, and we've already done it, these bolt-on positions that are sucking up the finances and taking it out of the classroom and adding positions away from the classroom. The idea is to add more of those types of specialty positions. They want to create weights with students. So if your student has a special need of sorts, an IEP 504, that you carry more weight, more money to your district than someone who doesn't come in with that type of label. English learners are a big problem in our state right now, where there's a massive amount of students who are coming into our schools that do not speak English. And the challenge of trying to educate them in a standard classroom is a real problem.
Right.
It's not rocket science to say, if I'm trying to teach, I don't know, a math, a science, whatever, and I'm trying to communicate, and the child can't understand me, it's not the child's fault. They can't understand you.
Right.
I don't understand this mindset that says, what probably needs to be done is to separate them, coach them up, move them forward. That's a whole separate question between, how did these individuals get here and should they be here? That's a whole nother show we can talk about. But the ones that are there are there. There's a federal requirement that you meet the needs of the individual in front of you. It's coming up and costing a lot of money. But, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah. I've recently read Pete Hegseth's book, the Secretary of Defense, who had a fascinating experience because he was in New Jersey.
Yep.
Obviously, he was with Fox News. And then he decided to move his family to Tennessee, primarily because of the education. And he was battling this education. He's researched it and went to Tennessee, where he felt that it was a little better environment. But he wrote a fascinating book on challenging the American mind. And I suggest taking a look at it, because he really goes back into the history and showing how the progressives took over the education system and how we swayed away from getting back to the basics of what we needed to teach.
Yeah.
And but that's the problem. We're not really teaching the basics. I didn't have all these programs. I turned out okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we lost our mindset when we went to this in 2010 or there's about. We got into this seed thing where excellence equals degrees, and I lost my mind. I was writing papers and pushing back,
Right.
because what I said was you're running right past the kids where a degree is not relevant to their success at all. Skills equals degree. So I was arguing that we needed to add the S and include skills and all those other things, and that's very important because we've added credits to graduation requirements. We've added the number of graduation requirements, but you just watered it down.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so in other words, we celebrate the fact that they got an Algebra 1 credit in 8th grade or 9th grade. They didn't learn it. They got the credit.
Right.
It's more important that they learn it, right? Because that's the value. Now, listen, some children learn Algebra 1 in a second, move on. That's why there's different levels to this. But I'm going to say it real quick. If we get structure back in the classroom where you hold kids accountable, where you put discipline back in the classroom, we have lost our way completely. And the problem with discipline is you are catering to the child who's the one struggling to handle themselves. And what you're forgetting is the 25 other kids who are experiencing learning loss because the train has to stop.
Right.
Because there's disruptions in the classroom. I liken it to this podcast. If it kept going out every 2 minutes, it wouldn't be a very effective podcast. You got to put that back in there. You got to have the expectation level go up. You got to focus on basics, make sure these kids can read and write and math and add. And if they do that, then they can move on to the next levels. But we push kids on and then scratch our head and say, How's this kid in 6th grade and he doesn't really get it? He's
Right.
passed. You know, think about this. We have some of the highest graduation rates we've ever had and the lowest scores.
Yeah.
Where does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it's
Yeah.
almost like we really need to focus on the basics, math, writing,
'Cause that's what matters.
the small stuff, and then all the other stuff that they want to filter in on
Yeah.
top of it. The technology classes, while really important, we should use that as carrots.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to get out of the math class? Great. Turn in your homework on time, show that you're competent, or at least have met the minimum criteria here, and then you get to go do these other things with your friends and stuff.
100%.
So, yeah, and that'll get kids, I think, to do their homework at
It
least.
might.
Or
gotta get-
you got to give them homework first.
You got to get the elementary kids up and moving.
We do.
Yep.
We stick them in front of computers all
Right.
day long. We decondition them, and that has an
Agreed.
impact because by the time they're in 5th and 6th grade, they're lazy.
Yeah.
They're used to sitting there like a dog that you buy that's a puppy, and you teach them how to be lazy. We've seen it. We do it. You do it. You don't take them out and let them you play. So they got kids. They got to be active. They got to have appropriate time to learn, appropriate time, and keep the expectation high on the things that matter, right? And don't get enamored on, trying to keep up with China or whatever else. They're wildly different classrooms.
Right.
What we should be concerned about is the end result. So anyway, get them up and get them busy, get them moving. You get to the 8th grade level, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level, you got to start to attack the cell phone, get rid of it. You got to put
Absolutely.
discipline and structure in, hold them accountable when they're not. And then we're in the high school level. That's when they start to go, all right, I'm tracking towards UPenn. I'm tracking towards Penco Tech,
Right.
right? And it's all good. We demonized that.
Yeah.
We took that out of the mix.
Back to the cell phone thing. Have you seen that technology where you have a bag and when you enter the classroom, you have to hold it to the sensor and it locks the phone in a bag, in an EM bag? Or
Yeah, we did a pilot study on that, and it was somewhat successful. I have a bill coming out that will basically direct all districts in the state to that they shall have a cell phone policy that includes restricting access during the class time, but for or very direct, pointed necessities. Other than that, they're required to be out, not permitted during class time instruction.
Yeah.
Because we see what it does to the challenges in the hallway and learning loss. Look, guys, they're cheating like a son of a gun, and you can't blame them,
Right.
right? If you
Right.
allow the child to have ice cream, they're going to have ice cream. If you allow them to have access to a phone that enables them to what we fear, which is how are they getting here, passing all these classes and don't know the information.
Right.
You're walking past what's happening, right? So teachers will tell you they support it.
Yeah.
Some parents, they'll be the parents that push back, say, I need to get a hold of my child. We cannot let that scenario control the entirety of the problem, right? And I always argue, somehow we made it through.
Somehow we did. When I was in school, we didn't have cell phones. And so
Somehow.
if my mom or dad needed to get hold of me, they called the school.
Yep. Call the school office.
about
They'll
that?
pull you out of class.
Yeah, they
and
will.
If an emergency
What if
happens, that's
there's-
how it works.
What if there's something going on at school, there's a shooter or something? Well, God bless, I hope that never happens. But if it does, they train for this all the time.
They do.
Well, even those bags, I'm pretty sure you can rip open and get
Yes.
your phone out in an emergency situation because
Yeah.
they built that into it.
Yeah.
But if the student does that in class, obviously they're accountable to replace that bag.
Yeah, so there's options for all
Yeah,
that.
there's technology.
When you want to improve, you said 3rd and 4th reading levels, get them up active and get them focused on the basics, right? And if you do that, these kids will start to improve,
They will.
right? And you really will. And then free up the teacher,
Yeah.
And
In the few minutes we have left, is there any other hot button issues you'd like to spend a few minutes on?
The budget's probably
The budget, yeah.
budget's
yeah.
a big one, right? You need to. So I'm on the Joint Finance Committee, and
What does the Joint Finance Committee do for our
so they take
me.
the governor's proposed budget, right, which he presents or she presents in
In which
January.
case, this is actually Governor Carney's budget, correct?
Governor Carney's budget,
Right.
which is unique, right, this year.
Mhm.
So Myers has the ability to kind of make some changes and suggestions, and we would have to reconvene of sorts. Right now, we're working off Carney's budget, and so it's our job to hear from the departments, hear them talk about some of the requests that are in the budget that were approved, and then maybe kind of push for things that weren't approved, which means an increase in spending. But what was telling, because before the departments came in, OMB, Office of
Of management budget.
Yes, came in, and they're basically the ones that read the numbers. They're the ones that are the governor's right hand on where the money is and how this is working. And they came in and they I never forget, we were walking through the pages, and page 5 in a little parentheses, you can picture a little counting sheet. I'm no rocket scientist, but I like to look at stuff. I saw the parentheses, which is always a telltale sign because that usually means a deficit of sorts. There was like $300 million in here, and it was for 2027. And so we went on to the next one, was trying to ask questions. I said, I need to go back to this page, and I need you to explain to me what I'm looking at. And what they said was, well, we're very conservative. We don't expect that to happen, but we want to make sure you're aware that we're operating at a deficit right now that's being covered by others' monies that wasn't utilized outside of the budget that we can bring into the budget to help manage deficits right now. We're doing that right now, and if things hold true, we're going to do it at a worse rate the following year. Now, they said, here's the good news, and they're right. We have this money set aside that's a budget smoothing type of money. It's an account of like $400 million, and that's designed in case we need to grab it to soften the blow. That's good news. The bad news is when I asked the question, okay, that's good. If this holds true, how long will that last with your given projections? He said, we'll be out of money the next year.
Yeah.
I said, my gosh, guys, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
We got to be very careful.
Yeah. We do have to be very careful.
Yeah.
And
It's only 300 million.
yeah. Well,
Change.
and part of the issue is when you take a look at the state economy, we briefly mentioned the issue with the corporate tax, and some would say, well, it's not really that much money, but I don't want to even focus on that right now. But when you take a look at the state economy, and when you take a look at the largest employers of the state, government is about a third of the employers of the state.
Sure.
Now, the reason why that's a problem is because government doesn't produce anything.
Yeah.
They take.
Yeah, sure.
They consume. They don't generate. And so when a third of your workforce is working for the government, and I can't remember the next percentage that works for healthcare, again, providing a service but not consuming anything, you're not generating a positive economy. And I would assume that part of what the state of Delaware gets as far as their income is based upon gross receipts taxes or issues like that. So it's a double-edged sword, which is why we're running into a problem, and we're going to have a really hard time getting ourselves out of that because so much of what we're spending is people who are employed with the government itself.
Personal income tax is a big one. It touches, here's the irony, it doesn't touch all Delaware, and it touches maybe 60% of it.
Correct.
Is really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
But that's one where they can move the needle and increase and takes more money out of your pocket. But that's really the only one that you're participating in. The other ones are we're relying on in the sheets tax, which is abandoned property. We're relying on corporate tax. And those things are all, really, you have to be careful.
Yeah.
Because,
Explain the sheets tax.
it's just it's abandoned property that remains on the books for a certain period of time, which then by default, because it's I guess incorporated here in Delaware, then the value of that gets Delaware has the right to go in and claim it.
And so Delaware had a monopoly on that for a long time, and all of a sudden the other states are sitting around saying, wait a minute.
A couple of them, yeah.
We're losing that.
Well, I don't know if we're losing it because, again, we're getting
So this big one was
impacted
gift
by it.
cards, right? So if
It's
somebody
the easy one to tangent.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you buy a gift card through a company, and then nobody ever cashes it. Say, you lose it or whatnot. Delaware, because those businesses were incorporated here,
Yes.
would get a percentage of that
Yes.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and it was a nice way to help. It's a way to help keep from going to the taxpayers
Right.
to ask for more money, gross receipts tax, all those things. And the challenge is, again, you got to protect it. You mentioned Senate Bill 21, which is dealing with whether or not, I call it the Musk bill. It is the Musk bill.
It is a Musk bill.
Right? Like it or not. Now, the court's got it wrong, in my opinion, but I'm a gym teacher. What do I know? I just think it was an activist decision. Here's the problem. It was an activist decision backed up by an appeal that validated the activist decision. That's the problem. I'm not convinced that the bill itself is. We got to be very careful of this bill.
Yeah.
It's not that I won't support it. I'm not positive I'm going to support it because I need to talk to both smart folks on both sides of the issue to have a clear understanding. Because what I don't want to do is overreact. We still have shareholders, right? That you have to respect. you need to respect their position and make sure that their rights are preserved.
But the shareholders endorsed the compensation package.
I don't disagree.
Twice.
Yeah.
Twice.
The argument is you can have one shareholder somehow.
There was a minority group of
One
shareholders.
shareholder with one share.
I get all that.
Yeah.
Like a
The
very
problem is they can't do that unless the court says they kind of validate the case, as I understand it, which, again, gets into that activism doesn't make sense stuff. Again, we're getting ready to put a bill in place, a very strong bill, that most people are probably like me. This is not our world, and we're trying to understand it. I just need to make sure I make the right decision because
Understood.
an overreaction because of an unjust ruling, doesn't sit well with me.
Okay.
That the courts were activists. This bill demonstrates that. The majority party wants to come in with a bill to cure it. I don't understand that.
Right.
Why a bill?
Yeah.
Stop appointing these activist judges.
I think that's the issue.
Yeah.
It's
Send a message. We're done with you
yeah.
guys.
And the same chancellor, by some quirk, got both cases, which is very interesting.
Change that. That doesn't take a bill. Change that so
Yeah.
that they rotate.
Right.
Change that by saying the next one's not going to be an activist.
Or maybe we have more balance in the Senate, so when these justices are brought up for confirmation,
I like your
the
thing.
Republican Party has an opportunity to weigh in, and you have to choose a chancellor that would be a little more understanding of the other position, because there's no way
Send
that
a
they're going to get
message.
confirmed.
That's right.
So maybe that's just my take on it.
That bill's a big bill, and it is
It
a
is a big bill.
definite change.
Yeah,
So I just need to make sure I value my vote, talk to the right people.
Well, Eric, we really appreciate you coming up here, and we will extend the opportunity anytime you want to come back, man. It's the floor is yours. So
Yeah, we
Thank you.
burned, an hour and 5 minutes, it
yeah,
looks like.
yeah,
So.
it goes by fast.
I hope some folks listen. I respect and enjoy the folks who listen. I don't know the audience level, but if you're up in Newcastle, stay in the fight.
Yeah.
Stay in the fight. It's worth the cause.
Yep, we will. Well, we
How can
so we-
people get a hold of you before we?
So, I guess you could call email. I'm on Facebook, pretty active there. So you can go to Eric Buckson. That's my public page. You can go to Senator Eric Buckson. That's my, my senator page, obviously. And just hit me with a message or something, or ericbuxton@gmail.com.
Yep, there you go.
Love to talk to you.
And we are in the First. We have a website, inthefirst.com. We're on Twitter, but more importantly, we're on YouTube. And if you go to YouTube, go in the First, and if you see this, if you hit like, we really appreciate it. If you want to share it, we also appreciate that. And then subscribe. And when you subscribe, every time we have a new podcast coming out, and we've got 4 that are going to be coming out within about a week's time period.
They'll all be out by the time they see this.
Yeah, you'll see that little red dot, let you know there's a new one out there. But we hit some fascinating issues that you just don't get the opportunity to hear right now. So we really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you,
All right.
guys. Peace.
All right, take care. Thank you.
That was fun, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much.